Hi folks, Steve here again and welcome to part 2 of my Grimdark Diorama diary. That was difficult to say, but let's crack on. So picking up from where I left off last time, what I really want to start doing now is working on the right side of the diorama, which is going to be this horrible organic nurgly matter. So I'm starting off by using a couple of pieces of bark from out my back garden. And they're just going to get a trial dry fit, make sure I'm happy with how they look, where they're placed, and then stick them down straight away with a bit of hot glue. That's the easiest kind of glue to use for this. I'm also at this point going to get a few more pieces of the Teflon squares that I was cutting out that I'm using as floor tiles, and just make sure that I've got them around the edge, cut to size, and just glue them down again with hot glue as I've got the gun out, and it's nice and easy. I've also got a few Poxwalker minis here as well, because I want to have things lurching out of the material that I'm going to be building up, so it looks like they're kind of part submerged and crawling out of it. So I'm just cutting them up, removing mould lines, things like that at the moment, just so I can place them, because I don't want the full minis, so I'm going to take parts off, largely removing the legs and a couple of arms here and there, so they can look like they're partially submerged. I've got some more bark, I've got some tree roots, things like that, and I'm just sizing this up as well because I want this to continue going up the wall in the corner, and then I'm going to build it up with a cheap homemade version of sculptor mould that I'll show you as well. And so I'm doing the same as what I did before. I'm dry fitting and making sure it's roughly going where I want it to, and then I'm going to pop that in place with the hot glue again. At that point I can also start positioning where I want the little bits of bodies, the Poxwalkers, to go, and I'll also just use a dab of hot glue to keep them there too. This bit was quite fiddly, and I was also kind of doing it on the fly. I had a rough idea of what I wanted it to look like, but as I'm putting bits in and moving them around, things like that, the idea is coming into life, and at that point I was just getting them stuck down as soon as I was happy with it. So with that done, I wanted to apply more texture and fill in all these gaps, and to do that I was going to use pretty much my homemade version of Sculptor Mould, which is a modelling product if you've not used it before. For this, it's essentially I'm using toilet paper or tissue paper and plaster of Paris. The idea is to soak the paper in a bowl until it starts to break apart and all the fibres become individual pieces, and then I'm just mixing in some plaster of Paris, and I want to mix it into quite a chunky paste. Once it's at a consistency I'm happy with, I just apply it directly onto the model, filling in the gaps around the bark, things like that, being careful to avoid getting any covering up the details on the Poxwalkers, etc. It takes about an hour or so to dry, probably a little less, and it dries quite rock hard. You may be wondering why you're just watching me mix this bowl of gunky stuff. It was around this point that the battery on my camera went, and it did so in a completely silent fashion, so I had no idea that had happened, and I just kind of cracked on. So I did lose part of the footage that I had. I didn't have any footage for this point as my camera had packed in, so we'll pick up where I realised and was able to charge my battery. Okay, so we're back now. The sculptor mould, it's been applied. As you can see, it's all the white stuff that's dried around there. That's set quite hard now. It looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. I'm just frustrated that it didn't record whilst I was putting it on, because I would have liked to have shown you that. But anyway, we'll get cracking on. So at this point I've got some little tentacles that I'd made. This was previously for something else. I had them left over and they came in handy, so these are some little green stuff tentacles. I normally always make these whenever I've got green stuff left over, when I've been doing a bit of sculpting or converting and you've got that blob that's left over and you don't know what to do with it. Just use a comb and a little bit of Vaseline just to keep it from sticking, roll it out into a thin sausage, and then roll the comb across it just to get it flattens it out, and it makes these little markings, and then once it dries it looks like a nice little tentacle. Comes in handy for things like this, so I've got quite a box of them knocking about, and so I brought them out for this because they were ideal for it. As you can see, all I'm doing here is I'm picking where I want them to go on the model, and I'm just getting them stuck in there with a bit of super glue. You can also see that I've been putting some additional texture on there as I've been moving around, and that brown stuff, that powder I'm applying, is coconut fibre. It's really good for adding texture to models and bases. I usually get it from a pet shop. It usually comes in quite a large block, and I just break apart bits that I need and keep it in a box. Okay, so now I'm more or less happy with everything as it is, and so what I want to do is seal the majority of it, so I'm going to be using an aerosol spray on it later on to prime it, and so I don't want any exposed foam coming damaged or melting. So I'm using a mix of PVA glue, some black craft paint, and a little bit of sand as well, just so it applies some additional texture to it and it's going to look good and break up the flat surfaces on the walls, things like that. Now I'm just going over pretty much the entire piece, aside from the sort of sculpt mold bit that I did, because that doesn't really need it. That's just going to get covered in spray paint anyway, and that's not going to be damaged by that. The last thing I'm going to do before I begin painting it is to just make sure that the edge of it, of the diorama, the base where the foam is exposed, that has a proper finish to it, and for that I'm just going to use some plain black cardstock that I have lying around. I'm just going to cut that into a strip the correct size, attach that with some hot glue, and once that's properly dried I'll trim it down, neaten it up, just make sure that it fits up okay. And that's going to make sure that when I do spray it with the primer, there's not going to be any chance of the foam melting, and it's also just going to give it a nice proper finish, and it'll look really good once it's painted up. And again, I'm using the same trick from my earlier video, where if I've got any little strands or blobs of hot glue that I want to get rid of, I'm just getting the lighter on them just to heat them up and then wiping them away with my finger. Okay, I'm happy with that, so now it's time to take it outside in my back garden and give it a thorough prime with a spray can. Okay, the primer's dried, it's looking good. I'm just going to go around and check and fill in any bits that might have been missed by the spray can, just with a brush and a bit of black paint. Now I'm going to start getting some paints on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is a bit of a zenithal prime, so I'm doing this just on the right hand side where the branches, the bark, all that texture is, and I'm just going to use some white paint through my airbrush, and I'm spraying it at a downward angle, 45 degrees at the most, just to try and hit all the highlights and create that natural shading. Over that I'm also going to lay down a few other colours, really thin down, some green, some purple, a little bit of flesh tone, just to start building up a bit of variation and make it look nice and horrible. It's quite subtle at the moment, the effect, but I'm going to bring it out later using some washes and some inks to really boost that. Switching over to the left side, I want this to look really rusty and decrepit and archaic, and so I'm going to focus mainly on sort of rusty brown colours and oranges, things like that, and build that up first, and then I'll start applying metallics after that, and then I'll also weather the metallics, so we've got like this three-pronged approach to putting the colours on. So here I'm starting with like a snakebite leather colour, quite thin, getting that around the edges, and I'm going to use a different mix of browns and oranges, things like that, to build up this rusty effect on it. It's quite a haphazard process. I'm going back and forth between a few different colours, using them quite dilute as well in places, so that just helps them blend and mix in. Trying to focus some of the lighter colours higher up to start building up highlights, also areas where rust has really built up as well. And here I'm starting to apply the metallic paint to these arched windows. I'm using Vallejo colour rust for this, which is quite a nice colour. And after that I'm going to start working on the rest of the metallic areas, starting off with a dry brush of chainmail, which is quite a dark silver colour, and this is going to be a targeted dry brush where I'm getting the metallic element on exactly where I want it. Now, unfortunately, not long after this, I had another issue with my recording. This time my memory card had filled up, and so once again the camera stopped recording, and I had no idea that this had happened, and so I just carried on happily painting away without realising that it wasn't filming. So unfortunately this is about the most footage that I have at the moment up to this stage. So yeah, lessons learned from that. Future videos I'll be much more careful in terms of my camera battery and the memory card. And that's pretty much all I have to show you for now. This is as far as I've got, and I hope you join me for part 3, where I'll be mostly working on the sort of demon prince, the model that's going to go as the centerpiece of the diorama. And we'll see how that goes, and hopefully there won't be any of the technical errors that have plagued this particular video. So that's all for now. Thanks very much, and bye.